a quiet coastal village. You know, like the kind of picturesque, serene backdrop you totally expect to see in a beloved, cozy Netflix drama.
Yeah, exactly.
But then the cameras flash, the crowd freezes, and the idyllic facade of a hit television show is just violently shattered, bathed in the frantic, strobing red and blue lights of police cruisers.
It's completely jarring.
It really is. Welcome to Starspoke Report, where we deep dive into Hollywood drama, music industry shakeups, and viral influencer scandals. From red carpet surprises to social media controversies, we uncover the stories behind the fame.
And today we're looking at a chilling shadow of true crime that has just completely enveloped the cast of the hit Netflix series Virgin River.
Right. We have a stack of recent news reports, police statements, and interviews that we are going to unpack for you, starting with a headline that it feels like it was ripped straight from a thriller. The Netflix star who went missing and was found dead as a murder victim.
The details we are dealing with today are entirely real, and they really highlight that jarring collision of fictional escapism and real-world violence. To understand the weight of this first story, we kind of need to look at the man at the center of it. Stewart McLean.
Known to his friends as Stu, right?
Yeah, Stu. He was 45 years old and really just a quintessential working actor. He wasn't, the megastar on the billboard, but he was absolutely the foundational glue of the Vancouver film ecosystem.
Oh, totally. If you watch television, you have absolutely seen his face. He built this remarkably solid resume over, more than a decade, with credits on massive genre shows: Arrow, Supernatural, The 100, Travelers Beyond.
He was in the Paramount Plus series Happy Face, too, and Murder in a Small Town.
Yeah, and most recently he appeared in Season 7 of Virgin River playing a character named Barfly.
Right. And the sources paint a very specific picture of Stewart off camera. He lived a really quiet life in Lions Bay, British Columbia. His friend and acting coach, Jeff Seymour, who actually knew him for about 8 years, described him as a straight arrow.
Yeah. A bit of a loner. Right?
Yeah, a loner who just loved reading and spending time at his home. But the critical psychological trait that makes this entire timeline so unsettling is that he was highly meticulously punctual.
This is a guy who simply does not miss a call time. And that personality trait is exactly what triggered the investigation so rapidly.
Yeah.
Let's look at the mechanics of how this escalated.
Okay, so the timeline.
Right. He is last seen at his residence in Lions Bay on Friday, May 15th, 2026. Saturday morning rolls around. He has a scheduled day of filming. The call time passes, and Stewart isn't there.
Which is a huge red flag.
Exactly. For an adult to go off the grid for a few hours, usually that doesn't trigger an immediate police response. But in the film industry, a character actor blowing a shoot is a massive blaring siren.
Oh, absolutely. The television production machine is incredibly rigid.
Mm-hmm.
Time is money, and seasoned actors like Stewart are essentially independent contractors. Their entire reputation relies on reliability.
Yeah, you mess up once, word gets around.
Precisely. Jeff Seymour actually noted that Stewart was meticulous about everything, saying there was no chance he blew it off or slept too late. When a hyper-reliable cog in that production machine suddenly vanishes, the people around him don't assume he, took a mental health day.
Right.
They know instinctively that a severe disruption has occurred. That professional mechanism is why the alarm was raised so quickly, leading to a missing person report filed with the Squamish RCMP by Monday, May 18.
So search and rescue crews are deployed, scouring the areas around Lions Bay. Then comes this agonizing silence until Friday, May 22. The Squamish RCMP announces they found suspicious evidence, and the paradigm of the investigation completely shifts.
Yeah, it becomes a much darker situation.
They hand the case over to Canada's Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, or IHIT. Stewart McLean's remains were discovered near the rail tracks, right across the street from his own home.
Which is just awful.
Yeah.
And, moving jurisdiction from the local RCMP to IHIT signifies that the physical evidence collected definitively points away from misadventure or suicide. It points directly toward foul play.
Right. They know it's a murder.
Exactly. Corporal Esther Tupper, the spokesperson for IATT, released a statement confirming they're working with the BC Coroner Service and the Integrated Forensic Identification Service. They're pulling CCTV footage and building a tight timeline. But in their press release, they included a phrase designed to temper the narrative. They stated they believe this to be an isolated incident.
Wait, I don't buy that framing.
You don't?
No, How can police confidently call this an isolated incident when the circumstances suggest the exact opposite?
What do you mean?
You have a man whose friends describe him as highly situationally aware. He's a homebody. He doesn't, like, run with a rough crowd. He gets murdered, essentially, across the street from his own sanctuary. For a killer to get the drop on a hyper-aware person in a quiet coastal village without anyone noticing, that feels incredibly targeted, not isolated.
Okay, I see your point. But from an investigative standpoint, isolated incident doesn't necessarily mean random. In fact, it often implies the opposite.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Yeah?
When homicide detectives use that specific phrase early in an investigation, it's a dual-purpose tool. First, forensically, it signals they do not believe there is a serial threat or an active danger to the general public of Lions Bay. They likely have seen evidence suggesting the victim and the perpetrator knew each other, or that the violence was specifically directed at McLean.
Oh, I see. So it's essentially a PR strategy to stop the community from panicking.
Partially, yes. I mean, a beloved figure murdered on his own doorstep shatters the illusion of safety in a small town. The police have to calm that panic. But more importantly, it is an investigative strategy.
Oh, so?
By classifying it as an isolated incident, they lower the temperature of the public discourse, right? Which allows them to keep the actual details of the crime scene tightly guarded. They need to verify the credibility of any suspects they interview without the water being muddied by public hysteria or, media speculation.
That makes a lot of sense. But regardless of the police strategy, it is a devastating loss for the Vancouver film community.
It really is.
Director and writer Ryan Miniker called Stewart the most giving actor. He pointed out that on set, Stewart wasn't acting for his own reel, He was acting to elevate everyone around him, making the scenes real and raw.
That's a huge compliment in this industry.
Definitely. Miniker even shared this really touching memory of them sitting around a fire at Stewart's place, having deep conversations until 4 in the morning. And you see that same heartbreak from his representation.
Yeah, Lucas Calland, Inc.
Exactly. Talent agents Jody Kaplan, Jennifer Lee, and Derek Nordick released statements remembering him as dedicated, eager, and endlessly funny. Kaplan actually noted that casting directors were constantly reaching out to say what a truly great guy he was.
It just illustrates how the laugh reverberates. It isn't just a headline about a TV star. It's a massive structural blow to an entire industry ecosystem that relied on his consistency and, well, his warmth.
Absolutely. And that's not even the wildest part. Later in this deep dive, we'll talk about a shocking twist in the French countryside that nobody saw coming.
The psychological weight of fame, especially when it intersects with profound personal trauma, takes this in a direction you really might not expect.
Yeah. If you're captivated by these real-life Hollywood mysteries, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what we uncover next. Because that instinct to manage public perception and maintain an illusion of safety brings us to the second story involving the Virgin River family.
Another tragedy.
Sadly, yes. This one happened across the globe, affecting actor Callum Kerr, who you might also know from his role in Hollyoaks.
So we're shifting from the illusion of community safety in British Columbia to the active, calculated staging of a safety illusion in France. It is a picturesque expat retirement that ends in a gruesome murder-suicide, forcing a grieving television star to take unprecedented steps to manage the fallout.
Here is the background. Dawn Kerr, who was 56, and her husband, Andrew Searle, who was 62. Originally from Scotland, they moved to Le Pesquis, a beautiful, tranquil hamlet south of Villefranche-de-Rouergue in the Aveyron region of France.
This was about a decade ago, right?
Yeah, about 10 years ago. And by all accounts, their life was idyllic. They hosted dinner parties, integrated well into the local community, had a really vibrant social life. They officially married in 2023, with Callum proudly walking his mother down the aisle.
Which, it looks like the perfect second act. But we have to examine Andrew's professional background because it becomes chillingly relevant to the mechanics of the crime.
Right.
Andrew stepped down in 2015 after a long career as a fraud investigator. He worked with the police, the Serious Fraud Office, and in financial crime assurance at Barclays Bank.
Wow.
Yeah. He spent his entire professional life dissecting deception, understanding evidence, and analyzing how investigators build narratives.
And that brings us to February 6, 2025. Neighbors notice the couple's sudden silence. Authorities are called to the house, and they find both Dawn and Andrew dead.
It's just a horrific scene.
It gets worse. The initial scene presented to the French authorities looked like a robbery gone horribly wrong. Furniture is overturned. A box of jewelry is scattered near Dawn's body.
And this is where forensic staging comes into play. Forensic staging is a deliberate alteration of a crime scene prior to the arrival of police. It's usually done to direct the investigation away from the most logical suspect, or sometimes to protect the victim's dignity. In this case, it was definitely the former.
Because of his background.
Exactly. You have a former fraud investigator who understands exactly what cognitive biases first responders bring to a scene. He knows that scattered jewelry and overturned furniture scream home invasion. He is attempting to manufacture a narrative to make a murder-suicide look like a random act of violence.
But the physical realities of the scene cut right through that staging. Prosecutor Fabrice Belargent confirmed there was no weapon found and no evidence of third-party involvement. Dawn suffered multiple blows to the head from both blunt and sharp objects.
Awful.
But Andrew was found hanged inside the property with a gag in his mouth and absolutely no visible defensive wounds on his body.
Right. The physics of the scene betray the staged narrative. The injuries Andrew sustained were consistent with self-hanging. A seasoned investigator might know how to overturn a table to look like a struggle, but they cannot fake the complex biological and physical evidence of a third-party intruder if one was never there.
That makes sense.
The lack of defensive wounds on Andrew, combined with the extreme blunt force trauma inflicted on Dawn, leads the authorities to officially rule it a murder-suicide.
The level of calculation involved in trying to cover up such a brutal act against your own spouse is deeply disturbing. And this forces Callum Kerr and his sister Amanda into an unimaginable position. They are drowning in sudden, violent grief, but because of Callum's public profile, they cannot grieve in private.
No, they really can't.
They have to immediately step into the role of crisis PR managers.
They took to social media and issued a firm public statement confirming the murder-suicide hypothesis before the final investigation was even closed. They stated clearly that their mother was killed by multiple blows and that Andrew's injuries were consistent with self-hanging.
Why do that, though? Why not just let the police handle the press? I mean, why step in while you're grieving?
Because nature abhors a vacuum, and the tabloid media abhors it even more. If the family doesn't assert the facts, the rumor mill takes over. But more importantly, this was a battle for narrative control over their mother's legacy.
Right. The core of their plea was a demand that Dawn's memory not be tied to her killer. They literally begged their mother's friends not to attend Andrew's funeral service, and they asked the public not to share photos of the couple together.
Yeah, that was a very specific request.
They explicitly stated it would be inappropriate for her memory to be associated with a service honoring the man responsible for her death. When I look at that statement, it doesn't just read like a press release. It acts like a psychological tourniquet.
Wow.
They are trying to stop the bleeding of their mother's identity into the killer's narrative.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, actually. In cases of intimate partner homicide, the perpetrator often ends up defining the narrative because their final violent act was so dominant.
The violence overshadows everything else.
Exactly. The victim is reduced to a footnote in the killer's story. What Callum and Amanda are doing is an exercise in profound psychological boundary setting. By demanding the public separate Dawn from Andrew, they are refusing to let the violence define who she was.
It makes you wonder about the psychological toll on someone like Callum. You are trying to process the fact that the man you trusted, the man you walked your mother down the aisle to marry, is responsible for her death.
It's unthinkable.
But instead of just processing that trauma, you have to actively curate the public's consumption of it. You have to monitor social media, issue statements, and manage the optics of a funeral. It is a secondary trauma layered over the initial grief.
It is an incredibly heavy burden. But asserting that control is often a vital step in psychological survival for the families of victims in high-profile cases.
Yeah.
They are reclaiming their agency in a situation where, all agency was violently stripped away from their mother.
So true. Stay tuned and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next, because we need to tie all of this together. Looking at both of these tragedies side by side forces a shift in perspective.
It certainly challenges the traditional dynamic between the audience and the entertainment industry.
Think about the jarring contrast here. Virgin River is the ultimate comfort watch. It is cozy, romantic, and defined by a sense of community where deep problems are usually resolved with a heartfelt conversation against a gorgeous mountainous backdrop.
Oh, for sure. It's the definition of fictional escapism.
Yet, the reality for the people bringing that escapism to life is starkly different. You have Stewart McLean, a giving, foundational actor in that community, murdered right outside his home. You have Callum Kerr, a rising star, forced to publicly navigate the horrific murder-suicide of his mother, perpetrated by a man whose career was built on uncovering the truth, only to use those skills to stage a lie.
It's incredibly dark. We use these shows to insulate ourselves from our own stress and anxieties.
Mhm.
We rely on the screen as a barrier. But these stories reveal the porosity of that barrier.
Yeah.
The people constructing our digital sanctuaries are entirely vulnerable to the darkest, most chaotic elements of the human experience off camera.
So, as you go about your day, I want you to mull over this final thought. When real-life true crime so violently shatters the illusion of our favorite fictional worlds, does it permanently alter the way you consume that entertainment?
That's a great question.
We look to these stars to rescue us from the weight of our realities. But who rescues them from theirs?
It's a profound question, and it completely reframes the cost of the entertainment we consume so casually.
You've been listening to Star Scoop Report, where Jordan and Janie uncover the stories shaping Hollywood, music, and pop culture. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep the stars shining.